Yo, what is up guys, my name is Patrick, host of EDH Brutality, and you're watching another EDH Deck Tech. Let's get into it. Welcome back folks, or welcome back to the channel. As always, thank you for dropping by and your ongoing support. Before we dive right into today's deck tech, as always, a link to the full deck list will be provided down in the description below, as well as timestamps throughout the video. So without further ado, let's jump right into today's commander. Making its debut in June of 1996 in the set of alliances, Phelddagrif is a 4/4 legendary Phelddagrif creature for 1 colorless, white, blue, and green that reads. For 1 green, Phelddagrif gains trample until end of turn.
Target opponent creates a 1/1 green hippo?
For 1 white, Phelddagrif gains flying until end of turn.
Target opponent gains 2 life. Okay, well what's the third ability?
Pay 1 blue and return Phelddagrif to its owner's hand.
And target opponent may draw a card. Yeah.
Hey yo, what the Okay, so let's be honest, he's not good, but he's perfect for a specific playstyle known as Group Hug.
The world needs more hugs, don't you think?
Now, for those of you that don't know what Group Hug is a deck archetype in the game of Magic the Gathering, which sole purpose is to support any player that is considered behind in the game. These decks typically get a bad rap as they draw out games, usually don't have win conditions, or kingmake certain players at the table. Luckily, this list is built a bit different, but before we get into the premise of the deck, we have to discuss first, is this a deck for you? Starting off with the cons, you will dislike this deck if you play to win or have a budget. You want to make aggressive plays. You don't like uphill battles, as well as giving your opponents an advantage. However, you will enjoy this deck if you enjoy having a good time. You enjoy working for that win or working politically with specific people at the table. And of course, if you want to play a unique commander. Now, when I first constructed this list, I really thought to myself, I want something unique. So I utilize cards with only retro or old borders. That's right, you won't see a single new card in here aside from perhaps 3 retro frame lands, and it works beautifully. And not only does this list function mechanically, but oh my gosh, the artwork, guys, the artwork is unmatched in this deck.
I've got to say, in all honesty, it's the biggest piece of dog shit.
Essentially, I built this deck for if I have kids down the road and I'm trying to teach them how to play Magic, I can pull out a deck and be like, hey, let's learn how to play the game in true Group Hug fashion. Total feels good moment. You can win politically, but you don't have to. And of course, since we're only utilizing a card pool that is older, you're not going to be winning through things like milling out your opponents or copious amounts of card draw and approach of the second sun. Nothing cheese like that. So with that out of the way, let's discuss why I call this deck the Kindergarten Hippo. Now, of course, if we're playing with literal kindergartners, we have to make sure they feel welcome when learning the game of Magic. Obviously, if they're older, this works too, because let's be honest, there's some pretty concerning people in the Magic community. So, we've got a pretty aggressive support package here, starting off with the 3 Oath enchantments. Starting things off, we've got Oath of Lieges for 1 colors and 1 white mana. This enchantment spell reads with errata text. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player chooses target player who controls more lands than they do and is their opponent's. The first player may search their library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. This is a great option for those players that are perhaps behind when it comes to lands, or if they just have 1 land less. It's just a better version of land text that is linear, that allows you to tutor up a basic land into play untapped, all while not counting as your land drop for turn, allowing you to play 2 lands and accelerate the game that much faster. Next up, we have another feels good card known as Oath of Scholars for 3 colors and 1 blue. This enchantment spell with errata text reads: at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player chooses target player who has more cards in hand than they do and is their opponent. The first player may discard their hand and draw 3 cards. This will allow a player, if they have less cards than a single player at the table, be like, hey, I don't like the cards in my hand. Let's discard them, draw 3 on upkeep, and then draw for turn, allowing me to get 4 new cards in my hand. This is especially great for the kiddos because, well, let's be honest, they don't know how to read and they don't think a card's good. Give them a card that they think is good, right? Just let them discard their hand, be like, hey, that's okay, buddy. You can draw more cards on your turn. And last up, we have Oath of Druids for 1 colors and 1 green. It's the exact same effect, but with creatures. It's an enchantment spell that reads, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player chooses target player who controls more creatures than they do and is their opponent. The first player may reveal cards from the top of their library until they reveal a creature card. If the first player does, that player puts that card onto the battlefield and all other cards revealed this way into their graveyard. So it's like, hey, you don't have enough creatures on board, so just start milling the top of your library. Whatever creature you hit first, that goes on the battlefield on your upkeep. You're welcome. Obviously, this card can get scary, especially if someone plays Eldrazi in the deck, but in more cases than not, we've got ways to abuse this, which we will discuss later. For further support, we have cards like Vernal Bloom, which pairs perfectly with Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth. This will allow our opponents to tap every land for their original color and then 1 extra green. And speaking of mana, obviously we had to throw a Helm of Awakening in the deck, a 2 colors artifact that states spells cost 1 colors less to cast. And while we're at it, why not throw in a Howling Mine in the deck, a 2 colors artifact that states, at the beginning of each player's draw step, if Howling Mine is untapped, that player draws an additional card. These are all great additions, especially when it comes to speeding the game up, ensuring that everyone has the mana, as well as cost reduction and card draw to cast whatever they want, whenever they want. Next up, we've got 2 creature cards for our linear support package that involve helping everyone but ourselves when they ETB. The first of which being Indentured Djinn for 1 colors and 2 blue mana. This 4/4 flyer reads, when Indentured Djinn enters the battlefield, each other player may draw up to 3 cards. This is a fantastic effect because it really throws everyone off at the table, especially when they look at you like,
what the hell are you doing, man? You just let everyone but yourself draw 3 cards. I don't trust you anymore.
And you're just smiling, you're just sitting pretty like,
Guys, I'm just here to have a good time. Go play your game.
and of course they aren't gonna swing at you because they're like, hey, this guy just gave me 3 cards. He didn't give anything. He just got a 4/4 flyer for 3 mana. Seems like a pretty good deal. It's awful, don't get me wrong, but it works in this deck. Next up for the ETB creatures, we have Hunted Wumpus. Now, I don't know what a Wumpus is, but he's a lot nicer than he looks. Hunted Wumpus is a 4 mana 6/6 creature with no keywords. Unbelievable. But he does have an ETB effect that reads, when Hunted Wumpus enters the battlefield, each other player may put a creature card from their hand onto the battlefield. Now, obviously, there are ways you can play these cards to your advantage. Let's say you play the Indentured Djinn and you hold off for a Windfall. You just let everyone draw 3 cards, you Windfall, boom, you draw that many cards as well. Or perhaps you just played the Hunted Wumpus and you're holding onto board wipe, hoping that someone puts in their best creature. It is a feels bad moment when these creatures do come in thanks to the Oath of Druids, but sometimes it can't be helped, and when it does, it's just a good laugh. And finally, the last 2 cards for our linear hug package revolve once again around 2 creatures, this time having death triggers. The first of which being a Veteran Explorer for 1 green mana. This human soldier scout, that's a 1/1, reads, when Veteran Explorer dies, each player may search their library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle. We also do have a Noble Benefactor in the deck for 2 colors and 1 blue. This human cleric reads, when Noble Benefactor dies, each player may search their library for a card and put that card into their hand. Then each player who searched their library this way shuffles. And that'll do it for our linear hug package here. Next up, we are going to be moving into the political support package. And these are once again hug cards, but where we can choose where we are directing those specific hugs for our own potential game. Now, obviously, to get on players' good sides, we will use our commander as well as a card known as Questing Phelddagrif. I don't know why Wizards didn't make this version of Phelddagrif legendary, because he's just better all around. For 1 green, we can give Questing Phelddagrif a 1/1 until end of turn, and target opponent gets a 1/1 green hippo. For 1 white, we can have Questing Phelddagrif gain protection from black and from red until end of turn, for a target opponent gaining 2 life. Or for 1 blue, we can have him gain flying until end of turn at the cost of target opponent may draw a card. Essentially the same exact thing as our commander, just better all around. So the object here is to use Questing Phelddagrif as well as our commander to give our opponents advantage and hopefully get them on our good side. Let's say they need blockers, we give them hippos. Or let's say they've taken some hits and they need life, we will give them life. And if both life or hippos are on today's menu, we do have Shield Mage Advocate for 2 colors in 1 white. This 1/3 human cleric reads, tap to return target card from an opponent's graveyard to their hand. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to any target this turn by a source of your choice. For other political favors, we also have Null Mage Advocate for 2 colors and 1 green. This 2/3 Insect Druid reads, return 2 target cards from an opponent's graveyard to their hand to destroy target artifact or enchantment. Both are fantastic includes for this political support package, because not only do they further our own game plan, but let's say we want to work with a specific player at the table, we can ensure that they get their specific cards they need that were perhaps countered or already used back in their hands. Or let's say we were playing against, once again, a literal kindergartner and we have to destroy something on their side of the field. We're like, listen buddy, it's not so bad because you're getting these 2 cards back for the price of 1. And finally, the last piece of political support we have here is a Rainbow Veil. It is a land with a tap ability that reads, add 1 mana of any color, and opponent gains control of Rainbow Veil at the beginning of the next end step. It's a really funny card. It allows our opponents to ramp faster, or we could also hose players with it if we want to give it to them with the Oath of Lieges on board. However, you have to be careful with this, because if you do, typically they might not want to give it back. Now, of course, giving our opponents advantage is a phenomenal thing, especially if it comes in the form of 1/1 hippos, thanks to our commander. However, it means nothing to us if it's just going to be the reason for our death. So we must make it where our opponents do not want to attack us, so we're going to play some taxing effects. I'm talking about cards like Propaganda, Windborn Muse, and Collective Restraint. If you don't want to physically have them pay a tax, let's say they have more mana, we can always play a Crawl Space or a Peacekeeper. Peacekeeper is my favorite in the deck simply because it prevents all attacks from all creatures happening for the entire game as long as Peacekeeper is on board. Essentially, we're a group hug deck. We must keep the peace. And if you want something a little bit less toxic, we do have cards that will deal with just the hippos we grant, so we don't have to worry about dying to our own gifts. First of which, we have Briar Patch, a 1 colors and 2 green enchantment spell that reads, whenever a creature attacks you, it gets -1/-0 until end of turn, ensuring those hippos that attack you will still survive, but at the cost of them not dealing any damage to you. If this is paired with Orm's Prayer, will actually net life, as Orm's Prayer is a 1 colors and 2 white mana enchantment spell that reads, if any creatures attack you, gain 1 life for each attacking creature. And of course, we have a similar effect known as Respite for 1 colors and 1 green. This instant spell says, prevent all combat damage to be dealt to you this turn. You gain 1 life for each attacking creature. All are great ways in stopping those 1/1 hippos that will be gifting throughout the game. And obviously, if we want to bypass this altogether, just put into play a Soul Warden. We're going to gain a life every single time an opponent's creature hits the field, or in this case, we grant a 1/1 green hippo. However, you can't stay alive if you can't draw these pieces, so this section where we talk about card draw. That's right. The two most selfish card draw spells in the deck are both being a Mystic Remora as well as a Rhystic Study. That's right. Wow. We're showing two up on the screen at the same time for this. Both are pretty self-explanatory. The Remora, or the fish I should say, isn't going to stick around since it does have cumulative upkeep, but it is a heavy hitter, as well as the Rhystic Study. It should be noted though that the Rhystic Study will fall off late game, especially if you're granting your opponents extra ramp, as this deck is very capable of doing so. As far as that, every other draw spell in the deck is Group Hug related. We have both Truce and Temporary Truce, both identical spells. The only difference is the speed in which they play. We have Words of Wisdom, a 1-colorless and blue instant speed spell that reads, you draw 2 cards, then each other player draws a card. Another great tool in our arsenal is Flux. For 2 colors and 1 blue mana, this sorcery speed spell reads, each player chooses and discards any number of cards, then draws that many cards. It's an amazing wheel cantrip that's optional for our opponents. Keep Watch is always a fun instant speed spell in which we can play when we have a Briar Patch or that Orm's Prayer on board, and let's say they're trying to swing lethal with 40 or more hippos. Obviously we're gonna have to be careful with this one, not to deck ourselves, depending on how many cards they're swinging with, as well as how many hippos we have gifted our opponents. And if we're talking about the cream de la cream of all group hugging draw spells, we have Prosperity. For 1 blue mana and X colorless, Prosperity is a sorcery speed spell that reads, each player draws X amount of cards, with flavor text that says life can never be too good. And good it is, because Prosperity combos heavily with 2 other cards in our list that we'll be discussing very shortly, so I recommend staying tuned throughout the rest of the video. We've got some very exciting combos coming your way. But as you can tell, we've got various ways of interacting with the board with the sole purpose, whether we're drawing cards, interacting with the table, or granting gifts, to make sure everyone has a smooth yet enjoyable quick play experience. Okay, enjoyable may not be the proper word. Chaotic, yes. Unforgettable, yes. As a matter of fact, we do have a bit of chaos ramp in the deck, starting with Show and Tell. For 2 colors and 1 blue, this sorcery speed spell reads, each player may put an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land card from their hand onto the battlefield. For faster but non-linear ramping, we've got Clear the Land. For 2 colors and 1 green, this sorcery speed spell reads, each player reveals the top 5 cards of his or her library, puts into play tapped all land cards revealed this way, and then removes the rest from the game. We also have Awakening, a 4 mana enchantment that's essentially a Seedborn Muse for the entire table. Crazy, especially paired with our commander if we want to grant people a lot of hippos. But the fastest of them all is perhaps Tempting Worm. For 1 colors and 1 green mana, this 5/5 worm creature reads, when Tempting Worm comes into play, each opponent may put any number of artifact, creature, enchantment, and or land cards from his or her hand into play. And although that is a great way for a mini deck showcase for all players at the table, it doesn't compare to the one we're about to show next. That's right, the Ultimate Deck Showcase requires a bit of setup here. And in most cases, if not all, the game will end when it resolves. For setup, I really enjoy myself a good Mirari's Wake. For 3 colors, 1 white and 1 green. This enchantment spell reads, creatures you control get +1/+1. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. Of course, this is a great card to have in the battlefield for this setup, however, it is not needed. Essentially, you just want to generate enough mana to have a massive X value for the card known as New Frontiers. New Frontiers is a massive ramp spell at sorcery speed that reads, each player may search his or her library for up to X basic land cards and put them into play tapped. Then, each player who searched his or her library this way shuffles it. And Mirari's Wake only gets stronger from here. Let's say we untap, we have double the mana, and what other X spell have we mentioned previously in the video? That's right, we mentioned a Prosperity. You're going to want to dump all but 4 of your mana into Prosperity, and hopefully draw into 1 final card. And that card being a Eureka. For 2 colorless and 2 green, this sorcery speed spell reads, starting with you, each player may put a permanent card from their hand onto the battlefield. Repeat this process until no one puts a card onto the battlefield. So if your 3 opponents choose not to put anything on, and you want to keep doing so, you can. This here is the ultimate deck showcase, as you get to see everybody's decks at the table, especially if you have a massive draw spell. For instance, the most I ever had into Prosperity's X was a total value of 43 mana. So when it came time to cast the Eureka, we put into play about 35 permanents each, and that's 140 cards on the table at once with delayed ETB triggers. Woo! It's fucked. It's so fucked. Now, obviously, we can't always live in Christmas land, and we need a way to outvalue our opponents. So to do so, we have once again that Oath of Druids as stated in the beginning of the video. If paired with our commander Phelddagrif, or even questing Phelddagrif, granting 1/1 green hippo tokens, we can ensure we always get that mill trigger off the Oath of Druids. This is to ensure our graveyard is filled to the brim. And once it's filled, we want to cast either a Plan or Birth, which states put all basic lands from all graveyards into play under their owner's control tapped, or a Replenish, which is a 3 colors and 1 white mana sorcery spell that reads, return all enchantment cards from your graveyard to play. And fear not if these cards have been milled, because we do have a Holistic Wisdom as well as a Regrowth to get them back if necessary. Another route we can take for advantage over our opponents is using either our commander Phelddagrif or questing Phelddagrif once again with its gift-giving 1/1 green hippo token abilities paired with an Intruder Alarm. Now, Intruder Alarm is an enchantment spell for 2 colors and 1 blue that reads, creatures don't untap during their controller's untap steps, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield, untap all creatures. Now, the way to abuse this interaction is to either have a Living Plane or a Nature's Revolt on board. What this will do is it will grant us infinite mana, since all of our mana are creatures. And whenever we create a 1/1 hippo token, we're going to untap all of our creatures. Now, these 2 cards were initially added to the deck as an anti-board wipe deterrent, as we want to keep our hippos that we gift players on the board, but so happened to generate infinite mana when we added the Intruder Alarm. This also has a byproduct of making an infinitely large questing Phelddagrif, as well as infinite life as long as we have a Soul Warden on board. Paired with a Unifying Theory, this infinite mana sink will also allow us to draw our entire deck as long as we have spells to play. So there are various ways in which we can form advantage over our opponents. We just have to be clever about it. With that out of the way, you're probably like, oh,
20 minutes in this video, how the hell does this deck win?
well, I hate to break it to you, but as a matter of fact, the deck can win. I almost got you there. It can win in one of 3 ways. The first of which is gifting various amounts of hippos throughout the game with either Phelddagrif or questing Phelddagrif, while having an Angel's Trumpet on board. Now, Angel's Trumpet is a 3 colorless mana artifact spell that reads, attacking does not cause creatures to tap. At the end of each player's turn, tap all untapped creatures he or she controls that did not attack this turn. Angel's Trumpet deals 1 damage to that player for each creature tapped this way. Now, this card can work in various ways. If we have ways to prevent attacks, let's say we have the crawl space on board, they can attack with all the creatures. They're going to get pinged down one by one. Or let's say after the combat phase and we gift a bunch of hippos, well, they already attacked and those hippos have summoning sickness, so they're all going to tap themselves and boom, they're going to ping themselves. And of course, if we do have that infinite mana, as we mentioned prior, it's only going to speed up this process. The second way in which this deck can win is once again gifting various amounts of hippos through questing Phelddagrif or our commander and pairing it with a Dingus Staff. Now, Dingus Staff is a 4 colorless mana artifact that reads, whenever a creature is put into any graveyard from play, Dingus Staff deals 2 damage to that creature's controller. So once you have enough hippos or enemy combatants on board, you play the Dingus Staff and pair it with any one of our 3 board wipes. To get the job done, we've got Wrath of God, Rout, or March of Souls. You should be very careful with these, however, especially if you do have a Nature's Revolt or a Living Plane on board, since that'll also be a mass land destruction spell, and you could just wipe yourself out in the process thanks to the Dingus Staff's damage. The third option is quite possibly our most aggressive one. We want to gift enough hippos to a single opponent, and then at instant speed for 2 colorless and 2 blue, cast Reigns of Power. Now for those that aren't familiar with Reigns of Power, it's an instant speed spell that reads, untap all creatures you control and all creatures target opponent controls. You and that opponent each gain control of all creatures the other controls until end of turn, and those creatures gain haste until end of turn. So let's say you only have your Phelddagrif on board and you give someone 40 hippos throughout the game and they never swung at you once. Well, you Reigns of Power, you're like, here's my one commander, I gain control of all your creatures until end of turn, and you just full swing into them. This effect, once again, will be amplified if you do have infinite mana and grant enough hippos to kill the entire table prior to casting the Reigns of Power. And last but not least, the final way this deck can close out a game, in true group hug fashion, the pure flavor win here is to work with a single player to eliminate the other 2 opponents at the table, and then hard casting a Divine Intervention for 8 colorless and 2 white mana. This is an enchantment spell with the eroded text that says Divine Intervention enters the battlefield with 2 intervention counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove an intervention counter from Divine Intervention. When you remove the last intervention counter from Divine Intervention, the game is a draw. So what will happen here is once this resolves is your political alliance here will end the game in a theoretical draw, and any player you took out prior to the Divine Intervention resolving will still be considered a lost match. And with that being said, we will conclude today's deck tech. I really hope you enjoyed the Kindergarten Hippo. It is quite possibly one of my favorite decks. As a matter of fact, I do have the entire list completely foiled out. Before I leave you all today, a quick reminder that the full Moxfield deck list, as well as primer, will be provided down in the description below, as well as the fact that EDH Brutality is now on Patreon with several tiers for you, the viewer, to get the most out of all things metal and magic. And as always, if you'd like to stay tuned for future videos here on the channel, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell down in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. So with that said, my name is Patrick, host of EDH Brutality. I thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out, guys.